the way to heal a trauma is to unfreeze it, which means that you have to experience the emotions. And I fucking hate that. Like, I am not somebody who's really big on feeling stuff, but I understand that I don't think there's any way around it.
In my work, I'm dealing with men all the time who are carrying levels of trauma, and often they're kind of unaware of it, which will exhibit in problems with feelings of worthiness or of feeling unlovable or not being enough or having a lot of social anxiety. So, all of these manifestations from these, I guess, programs that are running in the background. But I guess the way I've come to define trauma is if it is perceived as traumatic, especially as a child, whether or not it's objectively traumatic, then it can create a trauma. Would you have any thoughts on that? I mean, obviously there are certain things which everyone would agree, child abuse or violence or whatever, which causes trauma in people. But then, of course, different people respond to traumatic events in different ways, internalize them different ways, have greater and lesser ability to heal from them. And then, like I think of traumatic events in my childhood. I mean, I had not the best childhood, but not the worst. But being humiliated on stage when I got up to sing a song because I thought that was what would get the girls, which it was. It was just the wrong place, wrong time. But that I think back on that as like one of the more traumatic events. Whereas getting beaten up in the schoolyard, which was also sucked, didn't seem to leave as much of an emotional resonance on me throughout life. So yeah, I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are on what actually makes something traumatic, and how this then is carried, and what the defenses are that we use to then deal with those.
Sure. So there's a lot there. I'm going to try to remember all of my points. So I have a slightly unconventional take on this, which is that there is no such thing as a traumatic event. Maybe I'm just being punctilious with the language here, but that suggests that there is an event in objective reality that its intrinsic nature is that it's traumatizing, which means that I would think anybody who came into contact with it or passed through that experience should be traumatized. And to your point, we see that that's not the case. Some people are very resilient, others less so. People are differentially resilient. You are more resilient to the physical getting beat up than to the emotional experience of being humiliated, right? So another person, it might be the other way around. So it'd be hard to say that being humiliated on stage is a traumatic experience when it is for you, but not for me and not for that guy over there, right? So I think it's important to locate trauma where I see it, which is inside the person who's experiencing it. Trauma is an internal experience. It doesn't belong to external reality. And trauma manifests precisely where we get stuck. Trauma is a freeze response where the person can't move forward in some domain of his life or his emotions or his personality development. It's the freezingness is the trauma, right? That's where I'm getting at. Okay. I also think that there are degrees of trauma, right? The most traumatic event, experiences are the ones that people don't even recognize as trauma. I'll give you an example. I was working with a patient some years back, and he had these reservations about moving forward with his relationship. And so I was like, okay, that's pretty normal. And we talked about the woman in question, and she seemed fine, and they got along great. And he just seemed to was worried about like moving in. And I was like, I mean, I get it. The sex goes down. It's a new stage of the relationship, things like that. But nothing seemed to really hit. And we went through weeks of this. And then one day, kind of casually, he was just like, you know what? Do you think it might have to do with the fact that I saw my father murder my mother?
Yes. Everything that's going on for you will have
In front of
things
me.
to do with
And
that.
then he killed
Yeah.
himself in our living
Oh,
room.
fuck.
Do you think that might have anything to do with
Fucking
it?
hell.
And I was like, there might be something to that. So that's just one very extreme example, but I've seen other manifestations of trauma responses where as a clinician, I'm like, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. Like, I don't know why this person is getting hung up. And then there's this big reveal and the story begins to make a lot more sense to me, right? So the people who are more conscious of their trauma are actually less traumatized than the ones that aren't. So it's a good thing to be kind of aware of that. And the
Right,
way to
which is
get
where
through
I
it, go
sorry,
ahead.
which is where I guess, therapy or psychedelics or, actually investigating yourself is the process that you need to go through to maybe even just uncover the fact that you have trauma at all, like that people can operate walking wounded for decades without having really any conscious understanding of why.
Another thing that happens with that is, especially if it happens in childhood, children just sort of accept the reality which they're given. And so they don't know that anything is bad or wrong until on some level they begin to kind of swap stories with their friends or their girlfriends or other folks, and they're like, "Wait a minute, that didn't happen to you? I just thought that kind of." I thought everyone kind of got the shit beat out of them when their dad came home drunk every night. And it's like, no, dude, that's not it at all. And so, and that's interesting because the folks who tend to go through the most intense trauma and have these intense trauma responses, they often tend to isolate and they sometimes even hide these experiences from themselves. And so it's difficult for them to compare with others to know that this is a non normative experience that might require a little bit more examination.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, uncovering it isn't going to heal it. So the way to heal a trauma is to unfreeze it, which means that you have to experience the emotions. And I fucking hate that. Like, I am not somebody who's really big on feeling stuff, but I understand that I don't think there's any way around it. This is not going to sound very scientific, but like, if you don't feel an emotion, it kind of gets repressed and stored somewhere in your body. And I think the way of healing and letting go of some of that is to uncover those memories and feel the frozen emotion that has been encoded inside of you. And the feeling of the emotion is that emotion leaving you. I think of it like vomiting. You're tasting the food again because it's coming up, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to feel it to heal it. That's what they say in therapy. So feeling it is a way of like thawing that frozen emotionality, and eventually you will get through it. Like in the beginning, it's going to feel to some people that if I open that door, the flood is going to come in and I'm just going to drown, and it's going to be nothing but pain and tears and anger. And it might be that way, but I guarantee that no one has ever died from an emotion. They've died from what emotions have made them do. But you can just feel and experience an emotion, and drop by drop, you can empty that bucket. It's not pain. It's not fun, but I don't think there's any
Mm.
way around it.
I definitely absolutely agree because, I've been working with men now for 17 years, and the vast majority of men who come to me have issues with not being able to feel very much. They're just often quite locked up physically, fairly linear with their movements. So it's kind of obvious to me now. I can hear it in their speech patterns, in their gesturing, and then, asking them personalized questions. Like often they don't know what it means to feel an emotion. And so, a lot of the work that I've done with guys around getting them into their body, out of their minds, using meditation, using different types of breathing exercises, being able to just express through vocalizing by letting out a sigh. Like you can't imagine how difficult it is to get a man to sigh. Like I do a breath work class and I'll be like, all right, so breathe in and go, and I hear this, like it's like I have to train these guys to actually just let out a sound that's a kind of a primal or primordial, basic sound that all mammals make really. And so this then has massive reflection in terms of their ability to engage, to seduce, to be able to communicate with women. Because yeah, if they're locked up and they're only experiencing a very small range of emotions, then it makes it really difficult to actually lock in with somebody else's emotions. And as we know, women like emotions, not all of them all the time, but we need to be able to elicit and actually share them. So yeah, I see this in real time all the time. And then over the course of a workshop, seeing the guys loosen up, get more into their body, their voice drops, their eyes, brighten. So yeah, I don't think we can discount how crippling it can be to be unable to feel. And men, I guess, are not really taught that we are able to express it. I mean, maybe anger and competitiveness, but in general, men are not really encouraged to express emotions. So it can be really hard journey for guys to actually let go and express.
Yeah, I agree. From a clinical perspective, I found that if a man does still have access to his emotions, it's most likely to be anger. That's the
Hmm.
one emotion that men seem to retain access to, for better or for worse. And that can be useful because anger, we say, is a secondary emotion. Very few people experience anger primarily, they experience it in reaction to a more primary emotion, which is generally fear or sadness. Think about it like you're driving in a car and someone cuts you off. The first response is, but then as soon as you realize that you're safe, it's like, who the learn to fucking drive, you asshole. So it's like the
Hmm.
anger is actually a relief response to cover up the unbearable terror of the fear response, to also to mobilize towards action once we realize that we're safe. If we realized we weren't safe, we wouldn't become angry.
Yeah.
Anger is actually only a response in safety,
Right.
interestingly enough. So when I posit that to men, they're like, oh, okay, so there might be something behind that. So we can kind of begin to pull some of these other emotions out from behind the anger. I think for a lot of guys, it's grief. C.S. Lewis said that he sat with his anger long enough to know that its real name was grief. I know that's been my personal experience. I've suffered a great deal of loss and death from a young age. So I had a lot of that. I told my therapist at one point that I had this frozen lake of pain inside of me.
Mm.
That's what my subjective experience was. And I had to go through this like somatic experiencing where I had to sit down with my emotions every day. I fucking hated it. And I just had to like feel what there was to feel. And stuff would come up and it would be very confusing because these emotions are from a land far away and a time long ago, right? So they don't make sense. That's another clue to help people get over these issues is a disproportionate emotional response. If you have a reaction that's widely out of proportion to what's going on here, it's probably because it's being layered unconsciously with the memory, some sort of pattern recognition that I know what this is about and I'm back in that experience. And so you're now in this liminal kind of borderline space. That's what we talk about with borderline, is that it's not like you're seeing things that aren't there, but you're also not fully in reality. There's this unconscious projection on top of it, and you're really responding to that projection without even realizing it.
Hello gents, hope you enjoyed today's video with the one and only Orion Taraban. Stay tuned for the full interview with him coming out very soon. Now, if you'd like to do some training with me in the world's best in-field and inner-game workshops, well, the April one for Budapest next year is sold out, so too late. But I put up some new dates in Lisbon. This will be the first time I've ever run an infield workshop in Lisbon, so I'm very excited about that. Coming in May of 2025. My workshops are selling very fast, so if you're serious about getting this area of your life handled, learning the fine art and science of natural style seduction, then you better get onto it quickly because they are selling fast. Full details, click the link in the description, get on a call with us. We'll have a chat to you obligation free and see if you are the right fit for us and we're the right fit for you. And other than that, I guess we'll see you. Oh, hang on a second. One thing. I've been told by marketing consultants for years to tell your audience to like and subscribe and click the bell button. I just don't like doing it, but I'm going to do it. I'll probably start doing it from now on because there's about 70% of you guys who are watching these videos who are not subscribed. And if you subscribe, it helps me massively because it means that we get to reach more people to spread the good news. So it's pretty simple. You know the deal. Click the thing, press the thing, and that will be, that's useful to me. All right, that's it for sure. We'll see you in the next video. Peace.